I am a professional pianist and I have been for a number of years now. And these are the top 10 most common questions that I get. What advice would you give to someone who is just starting the piano? Well, I would say decide what type of pianist you want to be, because not every pianist is good at everything. You may notice that people who are really good at jazz improvisation aren't very good at performing classical pieces, and people who are really good at performing classical pieces aren't very good at playing by ear. And that's not to say that you can't obviously be great at all of these things, but prioritize. So I personally would always say learn the theory alongside whatever you're doing, whether that's learning pop songs by ear or whether that's learning classical grades. The people who are very good with their ears and that understand chords and things usually are the people who just sat and played the instrument a lot just for fun. How do you approach interpreting music? Something I've talked about a lot in my videos is what features of pieces of music have certain feelings. So for example, why is something in a major key opposed to a minor key? Or why is something using normal chords opposed to weird chords? Why does a piece of music use just a single line melody? Or why is it a really thick texture? And why is it played using an orchestra? All of these questions tell you something about the music and what the composer is trying to convey. So if something is big, then it's going to be representing the bigger emotions. It might be the feeling of being overwhelmed, or it might be euphoria or something like that. Or if it's just one single melody on its own and it's really slow, then that might represent loneliness or isolation. And because we are humans and we obviously innately feel these things, you can often just work backwards and say, this piece of music is making me feel like this. How is it doing it? What about the music is making me feel that way? How long have you been playing the piano? I've been playing the piano for 17 years, but I've been doing music in some capacity for 21 years. And I started on the viola, which is like a big violin. How many hours a day do you practice? If I really have to learn something for a deadline or a performance, then I will put more hours in, and if I don't have to learn anything, then it'll be a lot less hours. Basically, I just play as much as I need to get the job done. Have you ever performed in competitions? Yes, I have. Once I was playing in a Beethoven Sonata competition, and I was playing Beethoven Sonata in C minor. And in this competition, we had to play the sonata that we were playing from memory. And I got halfway through the second page of the piece of music in my head, and I just completely blanked.
I forgot.
So when I was on stage, I kept on playing through the first half of the second page over and over again until I could remember what was coming next. But generally speaking, the more you perform, and especially when you're performing in competitions against other people who are very good, you just get more comfortable with your own ability to kind of get the job done. What is the circle of fifths and how do you use it? Okay, so the circle of fifths is this. And you can essentially work your way around the circle either clockwise or anti-clockwise, and each time you move a step, you add a sharp or a flat to the key. So at the very top of the circle of fifths is C major, because that just has no sharps or flats. If you move one step clockwise, you get to G major, and that has one sharp. And then if you move again, it gets to D major, and that has two sharps. Again, A major, three sharps. Or if you go anti-clockwise, the other way around, you get flats. So one step anti-clockwise is F major, and that's one flat. Two steps is B flat major, and that's two flats. The interesting thing about the circle of fifths is that each step that you move is actually 5 letter names apart. So from C to G, for example, which is from the middle of the circle to one step clockwise, that's 5 notes apart, which is C, D, E, F, G. And then from G to D, G, A, B, C, D. And you can keep going with this all the way around the circle. But that's not all that the circle of fifths does. So on the inside of a circle of fifths, you've also got all of the minor keys. And each minor key is related to one of the major keys. So C major's relative minor is A minor, and that's because A minor also has no sharps or flats. They both have essentially exactly the same notes in the scale. They just start in different places. So C major would be C to C using all the white notes because there's no sharps or flats. And A minor would be A to A using all the white notes. The only difference between those two scales is where you start and finish, and therefore what note 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are in the scale. There is also one more part to this, because you can also work out what scales and chords work well together from the circle of fifths. So if we use C major, for example, again, the most closely related keys to C major are the ones on either side of it. So that's G major clockwise and F major counterclockwise. And that's because G major has one sharp and F major has one flat. So there is actually only one note difference in those two scales compared to C major. So if you're in the key of C major, you know that G major, F major, and A minor all work really well together, and they are the related keys. And you can do this from any scale in the circle of fifths. How do you memorize pieces of music? So the best way to memorize pieces of music is to use a method called chunking. And this is where you break down the piece of music into sections and try and learn those sections. If you are learning classical music specifically, a lot of pieces are already in sections. So if you're learning a really long piece, then those sections might be movements. And then within those movements, there might be various sections where the key changes, for example. And then once you've broken the piece down into various sections, I would then try and focus on where the chords are and where the chords change. If you're learning a long piece of music, there is absolutely no way that you can memorize it if you're trying to memorize each individual note. But if you get a whole bar that is outlining a C major chord, for example, then that is one thing that you have to remember rather than lots of individual notes. Can you learn music without reading music? Yes, of course you can. However, I would always advise learning to read music for several reasons. One, it makes life a lot easier. It means if you want to play something, you can quickly find the music online or find a book with it in, and then you can just play it. But if you really hate it and you're not too bothered about learning classical music, which largely requires you to learn to read music, then I would definitely suggest learning by ear. I would say that's an equally, if not more valuable skill to be able to listen to any piece of music and then play it. How do you improvise or make songs up on the spot? Well, this goes back to the related keys from the circle of fifths thing, and also a good understanding of scales and chords. For example, if you are playing in the key of C major and you know that that has no sharps or flats, then on the piano, you're only going to be playing the white notes.
That should be easy.
And then from there, if you know that most basic chords are formed by playing every other note in the scale, like this, then you can rearrange the notes in those chords anywhere on the piano, and then you can use the scale, so in this case that would be C major, all of the white notes, to come up with a melody. And once you get used to interpreting pieces of music for how they feel, you can start using some of those features in your own music and improvisation. So as I said earlier, if you want something to sound lonely and isolated, then play a single melody on its own. If you want something to sound euphoric, then it needs to be really big and thick textured, so you might spread across the piano. If you want something to sound jazzy, you might add extra notes into the chord, and then you can use the kind of blues scales in order to improvise. What do all the pedals do on the piano? Well, depending on what type of piano you have, you'll either have 3, 2, or 1 pedal. If you have 1 pedal, then you are most definitely playing an electric piano like this one, and your 1 pedal might look like this. And this pedal is the sustain pedal, and this is the far right pedal on any grand or upright piano. And essentially what it does is when you play some notes on the piano and hold the pedal down, it will sustain the notes for you. If you have 2 pedals, then the left pedal will be something called an una corda, and this is the left pedal if you have 3 pedals as well. And this functions slightly differently on an upright piano compared to a grand piano, but on a grand piano, what it does is it moves all of the keys very slightly so that the hammers only hit 2 of the 3 strings that it's supposed to hit. Normally, when you press a key on the piano, it hits 3 strings that all sound exactly the same, but if you have the una corda pedal down, then it will only hit 2 of those 3 strings, so it thins the sound just a little bit, and it's a way of being able to play even quieter than you normally would be able to. And if you have 3 pedals, the middle pedal is one of 2 things, and it varies between upright pianos and grand pianos. On a grand piano, it's most likely a sostenuto pedal, and this is where it will sustain any of the keys that you already have pressed down, but it won't sustain the keys that you are about to play. So an example being, if I played a chord and pressed the sostenuto pedal down, and then played something over the top of it, the chord notes are sustained, but the individual notes aren't. And the other option on upright pianos for the middle pedal is something called a practice pedal, and that's where you can usually press it and lock it down. And this puts a piece of felt in front of the hammers so that you don't annoy your neighbours. Those are the most common questions that I get asked, but if you have any questions, then let me know in the comments and I will answer them in a future video. And if you want to hear a piece that I wrote that has 1 million notes in it, then check out this video and I will see you there.